Hey guys, so my name is Pradyumna, and so I'll start with a very brief introduction about myself. I'm currently pursuing my PhD at UCLA at the Visual Machines Group, as was rightly mentioned, and I'm currently in my second year of MS and PhD. And as he said, I did my undergrad, I did my BTech in electrical engineering from IIT Madras, and now I'm pursuing my MS and PhD here. So my research largely focuses on physics and imaging. So uh, basically the interplay of physics, imaging with each other, and I'll discuss about that more in my talk. So with that being said, I'll get started. Just a few points before I start. So I mean, this is largely informal. So at any point, if you have any questions, you want to talk about something, feel free to interrupt me and ask me, as long as the organizer is okay with it. And also, because my study chair broke, so I'm giving this talk from my bed. So apologies if the camera is very shaky. Anyways, so I'll get started. So the topic I wanted to talk to you all about is basically I thought it would be great. It would be good if I could talk to you about the research I have pursued after beginning my MS and PhD at UCLA. And the overarching theme for that is what I've mentioned here, which is using physics and imaging to come up with smarter machines. And that seems like a very vague term, but I'll sort of describe to you what that means. So, as a very brief overview, I'm sure all of you are aware of what imaging is. Of course, all of you are aware of what physics is. So, uh, we know that while designing algorithms and systems for imaging, we often use physical context. Uh, it could be, for instance, the my very favorite example and the simplest example, for instance, is the cell phone cameras that we have that use something known as a Bayer pattern for capturing color. So the design of the Bayer pattern, for instance, is based out of very simple physical knowledge of the human eye, which is that our eyes are very, very much more sensitive to green color as opposed to red and blue, and so on. Basically, the point is imaging uses physics very liberally, and so that direction of the relationship is very well known. Uh, what we tried to do as part of our lab group was try to invert this relationship as well and see whether imaging can be used for to further physics. And I'll describe that in the rest of the talk. So basically, with that being said, uh, my talk would be largely split into two parts. The first would be how imaging can be used to further physics, which was the first thing I did after coming to UCLA. And the second is the exact flip. How one application of how physics may be used to enhance imaging and for a particular application, in this case, it's a biomedical application. So with that being said, I'll move forward. So yeah, as I said, the first uh, sort of paper that I discussed, first research that I'll discuss with you was titled Visual Physics, and yeah, Visual Physics discovering physical laws from video. So I mean, we all know about the apocryphal Newton story about how the apple fell on Newton, and then he realized, oh, the apple is falling, what's pulling it down? And he sort of figured out the concept of gravity. Very likely this never happened, but it's a great story. So, anyways, so what we thought was, uh, I mean, humans have discovered so much physics over the past maybe 4 centuries, 5 centuries, and even more. But in this era, over the past 50 years or so of machines and how machines have proliferated almost every domain of application, we thought the future definitely lies in machines that can not only follow instructions, but also discover stuff. And what do I mean by that? For instance, here's a very simple example. For instance, if I start with a video of that's my colleague just throwing basketball shots, and if I pass it through some system, can this system discover the laws of motion by just observing the basketball? Similarly, if I just observe a rotating object, in this case it was set up using a motor, and again I feed the videos through a system, can it discover these equations, the almost harmonic oscillation based equations that the rotating object follows? Uh, I mean, this is a very interesting idea because discovery has often almost always been left to the realm of humans. So humans discover these equations that govern ideas, and then these equations are used for various applications. And computers almost often crunch these equations. They never used to discover it. So this was an interesting idea that we tried to look at. And so we try to see if there's any other work that tries to do something similar. And we realized that all previous work, in fact, of course, they start with video frames and they come up with these equations. But one very important aspect that they miss are these governing parameters for equations. And what I mean by that is, if I just quickly go back to the previous slide, if you notice, for instance, this equation of uh, the rotational motion, you'll realize that, of course, there's a certain function that the equation follows. In this case, it's cosine and sine. But there are two other important characteristics of this equation, which is the amplitude and the angular frequency, or what we like to call as the governing physical parameters. So what happens is all previous work in this domain, what they did was they of course identified the object that they want to capture, which is reasonable. You need to know what you want to discuss physics from. But they also fed in these parameter values, like they calculated velocity and they fed it in. And then they reduced the problem to basically a curve fitting problem, right? You provide all the positions, you provide all the velocities, and then you're basically telling this machine to just fit a curve to it. So we wanted to take it one step further because this honestly is not what discovery is. What discovery is if you observe an object that's moving and just on the basis of that, based on various tries and trajectories of the object, if you're able to discover these governing equations, that's truly discovery. And so that's what we wanted to achieve through this paper. Uh, yeah, I'll largely be mostly high level, but if you want any specific technical details, feel free to interrupt me and ask me. So this was our pipeline that we sort of used. So we started off with a very common technique that's used for object detection called an RCNN. And we identified these objects that we want to track. And we got the position coordinates from it, which is reasonable because we want to see what object we are tracking, what object we want to get equations from. After that comes the interesting part. What we did was we used these position coordinates that we identified from these objects, and we fed this through a variational autoencoder. The reason we fed this through a variational autoencoder was we wanted to essentially decompose these positions, this bunch of positions, into simple governing parameters. Like, for instance, if it's a ball toss, then initial velocity. If it's a rotating object, then the amplitude and angular velocity, and so on. So we just passed it through an encoding, decoding variational autoencoder, a beta variational autoencoder specifically, that is often used to disentangle uh, parameters. And we identified these latent parameters out of it. What we then did was we used these latent parameters that were, by the way, entirely discovered by the machine, in this case, our computer. And we used these latent parameters along with the positions and fed it to something known as a symbolic regressor. And what the symbolic regressor does is it's basically fancy curve fitting, but instead of just fitting a curve to it, it tries to fit the curve based on a certain functional form. So it iterates over it iterates over functions and identifies the best functional fit for the algorithm. So we used all these parameters together, passed it through a symbolic regressor, and lo and behold, we were able to identify these equations out of our discovery pipeline. Now, uh, yeah, so that's largely our pipeline. Uh, and this is what we observed. So of course, we generated a bunch of synthetic videos of balls being tossed, and we were able to get very good equation discovery out of it, and that's almost expected, right? It's synthetic. There are no sort of confounding variables that are specific to the environment. So we were very successful in getting the equations. But the real test of any algorithm is, of course, if it can work in the wild, if it can work with sort of real videos. And that's what we tried to do here. So what we did was we just another colleague of mine just tossed a small basketball for 4 hours and we collected a bunch of his videos and we passed those videos specifically through our pipeline. And this is what we observed. So these were the three latent variables of the beta variational autoencoder. And we identified that two of the nodes specifically were highly correlated to the two coordinates of the initial velocity, the x initial velocity and the y initial velocity. And if you look back at your basic kinematics, you'll realize that these are the two governing parameters for the ball toss equation. Additionally, we intentionally provided it with three latent nodes, even though we knew there were only two governing parameters, because we wanted to sort of verify the robustness. And as you can see, the other two latent nodes are largely, at least not as well correlated to the initial velocity. So that was basically the proof of concept. So just as a sort of flashback, what we tried to do was we took these videos, we passed them through this pipeline that consisted of first position detection, then discovering the latent parameters, and then identifying equations. And we were able to come up with a pipeline that used images to come up with equations. Now, the obvious question is, okay, this is a great uh, spectacle, but why do we even need to discover equations, right? Haven't we already discovered all the equations that we need for daily life? And the answer is we don't know, right? So, what are the future applications of such a thing? So, I mean, the possibilities are literally endless, and I'll go beyond this slide as well. But here are a few things that we could think of. So, first is relay scattering. I'm sure you may have come across scattering even while you were studying for your JEE and beyond. Uh, and once you start looking into the scattering problem in detail, you'll realize that it's a very complicated inverse problem to solve. And what I mean by that is if you're looking at any object through a scattering medium, uh, the forward model equation is extremely complicated and it's extremely ill-posed. So the inverse model is very difficult to achieve, inverse problem. So what if we can discover various regimes of scattering equations to uh, of course help corroborate the equations we know, but beyond that to possibly generate artificial data for training deep learning pipelines and even to be used as physics priors for training. We could similarly use it for astrophysical phenomena such as here we've said Kepler's laws but they're already discovered, but something similar for astrophysical phenomena where you want to discover trends in planetary motion and so on. And finally, something to do with medical imaging. Here we've discovered DOSA imaging, but in general, going beyond that, uh, this is one domain where I think the possibilities are very broad, ranging from, and this relates a bit to my next section of the talk, where I discuss some physiological implications of my next work. But such a paradigm could, if deployed properly, could be used to discover a bunch of things. Like for instance, uh, as you would know, I'm not sure if you know, but uh, when a person is just about to have a stroke, a heart stroke, they discover some very critical cues. Like for instance, their speech starts slurring, their face starts drooping, they start perspiring, and so on. Now, suppose I want to design a system that's basically that uh, looks at a person and just before they're about to have a stroke, sends out an emergency message. You know, this is quite similar to what the Apple Watch does nowadays, where they sort of you wear the watch and based on your vital signs that it measures, if it detects that you're about to fall or you're about to have a heart attack, it immediately calls 911. Something similar to that, but for a stroke. If I want to build something like that, I mean, the biggest issue is how do I get data of people before they are having a stroke? That's impossible, right? So if we are able to identify some parameters, some relation between or thresholds between parameters that can be measured, like, I don't know, heart rate or respiratory rate, uh, pupil dilation, and so on. the possibilities are endless. So yeah, that's the first part of my talk where I wanted to talk to you about how imaging can be used for physics, and in fact, that physics can again be used for imaging, obviously. But I think this brings me to the second part of my talk, which is the flip, physical insight for enhancing imaging. And here I'll talk to you about my second work, which is titled Diverse RPPG. And over here, what we tried to do was use facial videos of subjects and basically estimate the heart rate of the subjects from those videos. So how fast, how frequently your heart is beating. So I guess I think Achyuta came here yesterday as well, and he must have shown something similar. But I'll describe it again anyways. So yeah, so here is an example of what we are essentially trying to do. So this is a subject that we asked to come and sit in our lab, and we captured a video of his. And this is the actual video. Here we just enhanced the color variations just so you can see that, oh, the skin color actually changes. And here are the ground truth blood volume waveform and the estimated blood volume waveform. And so this is essentially what we're trying to do. So what happens is when you are looking at any video of a subject has these very minor color changes. And why that arises is because as your blood is flowing in and out of your face as your heart pumps, the blood volume underneath your skin slightly changes. And because of just how light interacts with your skin, it sort of goes into the dermis, gets scattered out and comes back out. It's very slightly related to fraction. So if you are able to capture these volume changes, you should be able to identify the heart rate of the subject. So that was the intention of this project. So what we observed was, so uh, this sort of technology has been existing for a long time almost. So I think the first major paper was in 2009, and I mean even deep learning based approaches have started coming up from 2017, 2018. So this has been researched a lot. But what we observed a very key gap in this technology, and that has to do with diversity. What do I mean by that? So a lot of the or almost all of the existing algorithms were trained, tested, developed on data sets that are very racially biased. And what I mean by that is almost all the subjects were white people or light skin tone people. What happens is we don't know how the performance is in that case across skin tones. And as you could imagine, for any technology that has to be deployed like this, you want it to work fairly across all people, right? There's no point in it working well for some people and working horribly for the others. So diversity is a very important aspect. So we try to look at how that goes. And uh, so there's a very dense table, but I'll sort of break it down for you. So we looked at two broad regimes for capturing this heart rate based signal estimation, and they're as follows. So what happens is when you're trying to estimate the heart rate, you're obviously looking at the face and you aggregate the signal from all the regions of the face into one waveform and you infer from that. And there are two ways in which previously this aggregation has been done largely. First is just take all the facial pixels, just average them all together, see the signal you get, and do some fancy signal processing on that to get the heart rate. Second is be a bit more smart about it. What you could do is you could look at all the grid up the face, look at the various regions, and try to estimate the goodness of the signal in each of these regions using maybe the SNR and all that stuff, and weigh the regions based on their goodness and then estimate according to that. So these are the two previous methods that we tried. And if you just look at the first sub column, which goes as skin type, and it has light, medium, and dark, you'll see, and just look at the MA, which is the mean absolute error, you'll see that there's a clear degradation performance across skin tone. Light skin tones perform really well. Sorry, but for dark skin tones, the performance almost twice as worse, which is definitely not something that we want. So, and this is across the board on all existing methods. And there have been, in fact, in last year's CVPR, there was a workshop paper that try to go in depth about how various algorithms are biased. And this is across the board understood that, oh, there is a bias that exists. So next question is, why does that happen? If you want to solve it, you have to understand why does that happen. And without going too much into the detail of it, uh, here's what we identified as the issue. So what happens is this PPG signal or the blood volume signal that you see from your camera, as the blood volume under your skin is varying, uh, the strength of the signal decays, and this is a logarithmic plot, so it decays exponentially with the skin tone. So as you grow from light skin tones to dark skin tones, the strength goes exponentially down. Now, I mean, this is quite intuitive, right? Because if you look at a light skin tone person through a camera versus a dark skin tone person through a camera, even the skin, like the pixel intensity will be very different. So it's not too difficult to imagine that this very tiny variation due to blood volume is also different. So now, I mean, if signal strength reduces on its own, that's not an issue because you can still, as long as the signal is there, you should be able to infer it. The problem comes when you look at noise. Now, if you look at the characteristics of imaging noise, this is a very simplistic plot, but I just wanted to keep it more qualitative. Uh, and anyways, so if you look at the characteristics of imaging noise, you'll realize that, and again, this is quite intuitive, and you would have observed this when you capture images in dark scenarios versus light scenarios using a cell phone. You'll know that for dark pixel regions or low pixel values, the SNR is much lower, which means the noise effect is much higher as compared to the light pixel values. Now, when you put both of these two insights together, now this starts making sense, right? Because on one hand, for dark skin toned populations, the signal strength is much lower as compared to light skin toned people. But on the other hand, the SNR is also much lower while imaging. And now it makes sense because if the SNR is lower, how do you infer better from that? So we identified that, oh, okay, so the noise interaction with the signal is the major issue. So how do we deal with this? Oops. So this is what we came up with. We identified that the SNR weighting technique that was being previously used, again, because it was sort of trained on or designed based on these biased data sets, we identified that while they work well for these light skin tone subjects that all these data sets had, and I can quickly jump back to the numbers. If you compare facial aggregation with the SNR weighting, you, you'll realize that while for the light skin tone there's an improvement, for medium and dark it gets worse and worse. So yeah, so we identified that while for light skin tone, it's okay, gives a performance gain. But for these skin tones where they haven't really tested that well, it keeps progressively getting worse. And so we try to see why that happens. And what we figured out was these SNR weighting maps that they use uh, ostensibly to improve the noise performance. What happens is as the skin tone gets darker and darker, these maps start getting sparser and sparser. And what that means is, of course, when you are in when you are in a very low signal, high noise situation, you want to aggregate as much signal as you can, right? Of course, as much valid signal, but as much signal as you can to so that you can sort of minimize the effect of noise. But what was happening was this SNR weighting, which was to be used to reduce noise, was almost ironically re- increasing the effect of noise because of the sparsity. So what we decided was to use this diffuse weight map, and what that means is take the face, remove what we call as specular highlights, which are essentially direct reflections from the light source to the face to the camera. Remove these, decompose the image into a specular and diffuse component. Use this diffuse component, grid it together, and modulate the SNR weights using this graded component. What we end up with is a best of both worlds. While we get higher weights for these or estimated higher SNR regions, we also don't get as much sparsity because we've just modulated it out. And we also sort of remove these regions where performance is bad. Like if you notice for this subject, the forehead region, where there's a lot of specular highlight. So that's one of the improvements that we thought. And secondly, there was another tweak that we incorporated, which was this SNR weighting. After Instead of doing it after estimating the PPG signal or the blood volume signal, we decided to do it right before. uh, in the pixel domain itself, just so you can get better noise performance and so on. So basically, our algorithm was essentially directed entirely based on making this noise reduction more fair. And based on that, uh, now once we did that, the next step was to collect a data set. And again, as I said, almost existing data sets were biased. So we had to sort of set off on our own. And we conducted the study from, I think, from July till September last year, where we had about 60 people come in, uh, give their video, get their data collected, and sort of, yeah, get collected the data. And we added all these new diversities to the data set, like scene lighting diversity, camera angle diversity, activity diversity. We had the subject talk, not talk, and we collected a bunch of vital signs like heart rate, the electrocardiogram, pulse oxygenation or blood oxygenation, blood pressure, and so on. So, I mean, the goal was to have this data set for a long time. So anyone who's working in this domain can reach out to us, use this data set, and develop their algorithms. The main goal was to have an unbiased data set. I would say that even our data set, even though we set out to make it unbiased, is not entirely unbiased. It's still biased towards light skin tone subjects, or rather medium skin tone subjects, just because of how the population demographic is. But still, it's much fairer than existing datasets. So we used our dataset to validate performance, and what we saw was that indeed, with these almost simple tweaks, that the only difference was that these tweaks, and just notice how we went from first understanding the physics of the problem and realizing that, okay, the noise is the issue, that's the major issue, and then realizing that existing denoising techniques are in fact not working well across the board of skin tones, and just designing these denoising techniques to be fair, or at least fairer, we were able to get clear performance gains across skin tones. And the improvements were like, in fact, if you try to subtract between the proposed method and the facial aggregation, you'll realize that we got the biggest improvement for the dark skin tone subjects. Uh, and even from the left figure, if you notice the heart rate estimate at the bottom, you'll realize that these comparison methods, they sort of fail in regions where signal is not estimated well, whereas our proposed method is much more consistent across all uh, regions, resulting in much better heart rate estimates. So, I mean, yeah, that was our second approach. I mean, there are some more technical details I've left out, but you can feel free to read the paper, and it's linked on our group website, and you can get all the technical details. But I mean, my intention over here, on a high level, was to tell you how we use this notion of physics, understanding the physics, and then almost very simple tweaks to the algorithms to get like improvements as opposed to existing methods that didn't have these improvements. So yeah, I think with that being said, that covers the two halves of my talk, and that's largely what I wanted to say. Just to summarize again, uh, the two parts were essentially physics and imaging and how they interact in the two directions. First is to use imaging for physics, which is quite a new idea, and I do believe it's a very promising idea, but obviously also a very difficult idea. And secondly is using physics for imaging, which is very commonly used, but here was one application where it has been used always, but these almost unknown biases that creep in that need to sort of be resolved and taken care of can be very simply handled by just getting some physical insight and analyzing this. And yeah, with that being said, that's it from me. Thank you guys, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.
Yeah, I have one question.
Yeah, bro.
What is that noise you were talking about in image? Can you briefly explain?
Oh, okay. So you want to know about imaging noise? Uh, can you clarify a bit? Do you mean what is the source of noise in images?
No, like what is the definition? What is that noise that is coming?
Oh, noise. Okay. So what happens is, do you know what SNR means? Signal to noise ratio?
No.
Okay, cool. So what happens is, so here's a nice experiment for you to do. So what you can do is take your cell phone, take the camera. Uh, Wait, first let me stop sharing my screen. And is that okay if I should stop sharing my screen?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, when you're talking about noise, so here's a very simple experiment for you to understand imaging noise. What you can do is just go out at night and take an image from your camera in all automatic settings, and try to see the image, and take the image of the same location in the day and try to see the image. You'll realize that between these two images, the darker image has a lot of these grainy effects, where there are these splotches of noise, which is what we call noise, that's not related to the image but more to the sensor. That's known as noise. And the source of it is because of the analog processing chain in the imaging systems. What happens is, just how your cameras work is they have something known as photodiodes. And what happens is, as light is incident on these diodes, uh, there's a proportional conversion between the number of photons incident to basically a current being produced by the photodiodes, and this current is measured and captured as their image value. And just because of the analog chain, the even the measurement of the current as is very inaccurate, and there's a noise in this measurement, which means that while it's the measurements are centered around the actual value, they have some deviation as a result of this noise. So now, because of this, there is a lot of uh, artifacts in the image that are not actually present in the environment, but they arise out of basically the electronics of imaging rather than imaging. That's what we call noise. It's a very common, like very widely studied topic in imaging. Uh, you can just Google imaging noise and you'll find so many papers. So yeah, I encourage you to read about on that.
So, can you tell like the old model phone images have like very high noise because it has that low quality image?
Old model phone images. Can you? What do you mean? Like older phones?
Yeah, old phones like in 2000 release phones which have like very
Hmm.
bad image quality.
So they, they are that's there are multiple causes. They definitely have worse noise performance. Like if I don't know whether you have a 2000 phone with you, if you go out in the dark and take an image, I'm sure you'll get a very horrible image. But over there, the problems are in fact much more nuanced. What happens is, their optics are not also as good. So there are all these various optical aberrations, like chromatic aberrations and like all these optical phenomena that result in washed out images, worst images. So old phones are across the table bad. They have worse noise performance, worse optics, worse signal processing. So the image is across the board bad.
Okay, okay, yeah. Thank you. Thanks a lot for answering.
Cool, cool. Yeah, let me know if you have any other questions.
Hey, so in that physics-based mapping, in the position detection, like orientation of image also matters a lot. No, like so, how you are like rectifying that problem, like position detection using coordinates. Like if orientation isn't proper, like and if position is mismatched, then equation can be derived wrong.
Yes, it can. In fact, that's quite nuanced. But before I answer that, can you clarify what you mean by orientation? Do you mean how the camera is placed, or what do you mean by orientation?
Like like just for example when we scan something in a document and all, and like if we can't place the camera properly, like it's not exactly
You mean
came as the
angle with
document itself,
which?
angle and all. Yeah,
Okay, yeah, yeah, that's a great question. So, in fact, yeah, what happens is, and this is very fundamental to imaging, in fact. So, for instance, here's a thought experiment. Suppose you're looking at something moving across in front of you, and it's moving exactly perpendicular to your plane of eyes. It's moving from left to right, and it covers some distance in a fixed amount of time. And you can estimate the velocity of the object. Uh, Now, suppose for this, imagine you cannot perceive depth. Okay. Now, suppose if you if the object does not move in a plane perpendicular to the eyes, but it in fact goes of course horizontally, but farther away from you as well. Now what happens is, now even if it moves with the same velocity, you will perceive it as covering this a much shorter distance, and your perceived velocity, which is in fact the horizontal component of the velocity, will be much lower. So for our experiments, we ensured that the ball toss was in fact perpendicular to the camera, which you could view of it as a drawback. But my argument would be that in fact this drawback is very fundamental to just cameras, because the fact is that the cameras sort of project this 3D space in front of you into a 2D projection, right? So you're obviously losing depth information. So any motion in this third dimension, it's a bit difficult to capture instant. And of course, like there can be smarter ways to address it, like using multiple cameras, which is how we see depth, using two eyes, or using just the size of the object. Where if it goes farther away, it goes smaller, and then you estimate and so on. But yeah, you're very right. We had to control the camera orientation, just so we could get good data to verify our algorithms.
And regarding the scope of this paper, like it can be extended to detect the editing and all, right?
Detect editing. What do you mean by that?
Like if you run this method on any action sequence and all, obviously it won't give correct equations and all.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, I mean, this method it was more like a proof of concept of like this idea of going from videos to images. I mean, I don't think if, for instance, you take some application, like I gave the medical imaging application, if you take any application, I don't think you can use the same pipeline. But the point of this paper was that it's the idea, right? To have these camera systems and have them discover these visual phenomena, because they are able to capture such high dimensional data, like in the color domain, size domain, shape domain, position, and all that. And there's so much information, much more than visually we can capture. So it's almost the next step towards discovery. And the point of the paper was to set up this notion. And for every other application, I'm almost certain that for any application, you need a more fine-tuned pipeline itself.
Thanks.
Hi, Pradyumna. My question is like my question is related to physics based uh, machine learning. So as of now in medical domain, if we look at the histopathology image classification or the like MRI image classification, they require a very specific data set that is captured using same equipment. And if we are using some data set that is captured using different equipment, they do not perform very well on that. So can physics based machine learning can make it universal for all, or still it would be largely dependent on the type of data it is getting?
Yeah, so this is a great question. And what you should look into, this is in fact still, I think, an ongoing domain of research, and a very interesting. So this is known as domain specificity. So what happens if you train some model on a certain data set, and you try to test it on another data set which has the same phenomenon, but there are these other secondary factors. Like a simple example could be the position of the, or the orientation of the system, or the resolution of the system, and so on. And if you just blindly train a model on one data set and go to another, you'll, as Alabia said, you'll notice that it fails horribly. So an interesting domain of research that is ongoing in this field is known as domain randomization and sim to real. So what happens is, what domain randomization means is, you take a data set, and what you try to do is, of course, you train on the data set, but you also randomize the data set. And what you do is you vary some parameters in the data set. Like, for instance, you can change the color of the data set, you can project the data set and change the orientation, you can uh, change the brightness, and so on. And this is a very simple example, but the idea is it's very similar to yeah, you try to diversify your data so that you can randomize, and these are deterministic ways to randomize, but there are several works that try to do this automatically by identifying random parameters to tweak so that your trained data is much more, it covers a much larger set of possibilities, so your testing can be more likely. And the second interesting domain on this is something known as sim-to-real. And the idea over here is, and this again ties back to discovering physics. So if you're able to identify the physics of this MRI imaging and this entire setup, the forward model, and if you are able to synthetically generate data for this, you of course capture real data, but if you are able to model this phenomenon well enough, and if you're able to generate synthetic data out of this, what you can actually do is you can train your model entirely on synthetic data. And once you're working with synthetic data, you can get as much data with as much variability as you want. And the idea is if your model is good enough, you should be able to test and perform well on any data set. So this again here, this notion of understanding the physics comes very, it fits in very neatly. So again, both of these are very uh, good domains of research. In fact, Sim2Real, I don't know if any of you are into robotics. I'm not specifically, but Sim2Real, sorry, is a very central aspect of robotics, because robotics, of course, in robotics you interact with real environments, and it's very critical to that. Yeah, hope that
Thanks a lot.
answers your question. Yeah,
Yeah, it was really great. Thanks a lot.
good. Okay, I imagine that's all the questions.
Okay, guys, I think we can have, if anyone wants to ask a question, we can have one last round of questions before we wrap this up. So if you have any question, you can either turn on your microphone or you can put it up in the chat. Okay, I think there are no more questions. So, Pradyumna, I think on behalf of IEEE NITK, I would like to thank you for giving this talk, and I'm pretty sure it's been insightful for everyone about physics-based imaging and the other fields that were covered. So thanks a lot for coming out and uh, talking here.
Thanks a lot, guys. Great fun. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Pratimana was really insightful to listen to you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thanks a lot, guys. Yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you have any other questions. I think my mail should be there somewhere. So you should be able to find it. Yeah, thanks, guys.